course, we are going to cut this, but nevertheless. Good afternoon, and we are going to start this round table having as guest speakers Professor John Milton from the University of São Paulo and Professor Mario Murcia from the National University, Autonomous National University of Mexico. And it is really a great pleasure to have both of you today to speak about translation. And then we will follow this round table with the launch of Professor Murcia's book, Sonetos y una canción, by John Milton, the poet. And we will have our colleague John Milton also speaking about his translations and John Milton's translations. So Professor John Milton is a full professor here at USP, and he did his undergraduate course in Spanish and English literature at the University of Wales, Swansea, in 1978. He did his MA at PUCI, the Pontificia Universidad Católica in São Paulo, in applied linguistics in 1986. And then his PhD is from the University of São Paulo in English and literature and English studies, as we said at that time. Presently, he is a professor in our program of English and linguistic and literary studies, and he acts in different areas, especially, but he is one of the first names here introducing translation courses at in Brazil, I would say, but then here in São Paulo, at the University of São Paulo, a whole program on translation, and then literary translation, and translation about Shakespeare, and is it? Yes, here in Brazil. Right, and Professor Murcia is a poet, literary translation, and full professor of English, translation and comparative literature. His main area of academic research is Anglophone and Hispanophone drama and poetry from the 20th century and the early modern period, with a particular emphasis on English and colonial Spanish poetry produced in the 16th and 17th centuries. Murcia also specializes in contemporary Anglo-Irish poetry. As Mexico's only Miltonists, Murcia has published annotated Spanish editions of John Milton's Masque, Areopagitica, I hope I said it correctly, and the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates. He has also participated in the first ever Mexican edition of James Joyce's Dubliners, which adds to his various Spanish translations of the poetry, drama, and prose of authors such as Barry Callahan, Robert Graves, Edgar Allan Poe, Adrian Rich, and Dylan Thomas, among many others. He also recently translated Antología de Cuentos Escoceses Contemporáneos, and is currently working on the translation of Milton's sonnets, as well as Shakespeare's Cymbeline, Double Falsehood, and Henry VIII. Murcia's book, Versos escritos en agua, la influencia del paraíso perdido en Byron, Keats y Yeats, attempts to explain how the figure of Milton's Satan was adapted and sublimated in the poetry of the so-called younger romantics. Murcia's most recent book of poetry is entitled El Mundo Perdone, and his poetical works have appeared in publications such as Caminos Inciertos, Emanations, in different parts of, we would say, of the English-speaking world and also Spanish-speaking world. So thank you very much for being here with us, Mario and John too, and so I give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to begin. I'm going to be using all the slides, so I think it's... Can you see them? Next, okay.
Yes.
Okay, everyone can see the slides?
Yes.
I'm using all the slides, and I'm going to talk for 20-30 minutes, then pass over to Mario. Okay, translating poetry on a cloud of ravens. This will become self-explanatory. You can guess which poem I'm going to use to exemplify. All right, some basic precepts before you translate poetry. Mario, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this. Which of you do translate poetry here as well? No,
I'm here. No one.
No. Okay, this is not so. Maybe this will not be not so. This will be good for you. Mario's familiar. Mario does all this automatically.
You can once get us now.
Okay. Right. The translator must, will, can think of the following when translating poetry, especially, but also much fiction. Rhyme. Of course, many people think poems must rhyme. You must preserve the rhyme when translating. And opening, I'm not saying must. That's what people think. Rhythm. Maintain the rhythm. Assonance and alliteration. How important is that in many poems, as we'll be seeing in the Raven? That's very, very central. Yeah, I can make these, if you don't have to, I can make these available to you, so you can, if you miss anything, you can. What about the visual element with much poetry like Apollinaire, concrete poetry, George Herbert, the altar? It's very, very important. Punctuation. Emily Dickinson's a case in point. We must maintain the meaning, what happens in the poem may be less important in poetry than in fiction. Of course, we have the problem of translating from English, a more concise language, to Latin languages, of if we want to maintain the form, we must omit something. I notice some omissions in Mario's sonnets. Are we going to add anything? Certainly, when I translate prose, I often add a little gloss. When, for example, translate articles, academic articles mentioning something in Brazil, for example, Uberaba, I may add a gloss, medium-sized city in the state of Minas Gerais. Register. Are we going up, down the register? We're going to try to maintain it the same. Are we going to write in archaic, poetic language, as of course poets and translators in the 19th century, thou, 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 thou? Slang. For example, American translations in the second half of the 19th century, Greek poetry, in a very contemporary idiom. What about using regionalisms and dialect? I know certainly in Hilverendelsen there's a strong tradition of regional poetry and using a Gaucho dialect. Will translators be allowed to use footnotes? Will they be able to write a preface? We have both here. But we don't have any illustrations, do we? I don't think. No illustrations, no. Will the original also be there? Much contemporary poetry, much contemporary translation has the original on a mirrored page. Where will it be? Alternatively, it could be in a footnote, could be at the back. Has a poem been translated before? Are they pioneering a new author? From what I heard Lara was saying, Mario is the first translator of my namesake. How many translations of the poem work available? Where will it be published? An important publisher? In a poetry magazine? In a small, insignificant publisher? On the internet, anybody can publish material on the internet that's in the public domain. Will the poem be translated to be read aloud? Very much in English poetry, we seem to have lost that. Will it be set to music? In some cultures, Celtic cultures, there's still the idea of the public bard who might read it. I often semi-joke that the translations I've helped students of mine doing, for example, Tennyson should be coming out, which I helped my student Pedro Mohalan to do, first Tennyson in Brazil. I hope it comes out soon because it's going to be a good Christmas present to buy for your aunt. Why did they choose this poem, this work, this author? In the case of my student Pedro Mohalan, I kind of invited him to work with Tennyson. Invitation by publisher, by teacher, is a part of a project. MA, PhD, or what we here call iniciação científica, undergrad project. Is there a possibility of a scholarship if you go into a certain project which has scholarships available that's going to attract you? Or just because you wanted to gain prestige, a gap in the market. Maybe the translator hated the previous translation, and maybe they might be fighting an enemy translator. Now don't joke at this happens. There's an enormous fight in the Folha de São Paulo, this was more than 20 years ago, between Bruno Tolentino and Augusto de Campos over a translation of Stephen Crane poem. I wrote on this enormous fight between the two. They were swearing at each other in the pages of the Folha de São Paulo. They really getting at each other's. I'm sure if they had been in the room together, they would have got at each other physically. Augusto de Campos, you all know, Bruno Tolentino, a very religious Catholic poet who spent a number of years imprisoned in an important prison in Devon, England, drug trafficking. Our colleague Juliana from Germany was a good friend of his, who died now, and she has a lot of writing about him. Anyway, this is all, we heard that Mario was a pioneer, did not produce this translation to fight, and nothing. Okay, Milton. Well, first of all, I'm not a relation of John Milton. It's not such an uncommon name, Milton. And it comes from either Milltown or Middletown. I joke with people that I'm a cousin of Kate Middleton. Milton. His line died out, apparently. There's very, very little here in Brazil. I knew there wasn't very much. I didn't realize that what there is mostly from Portugal. Basically, there has never been any Miltonist here in Brazil. Having the fact of having the same name can be a little bit of distance from.
Yes,
we have Paraíso Reconquistado by Guilherme Gontijo Flores, a well-known translator, with a group of students of his, you can see here, part of the undergraduate course in the Federal University of Paraná, just over 10 years ago. Pretty big task. And then the versions of Paradise Lost we have are both Portuguese. And Editora 34 published quite recently Daniel Jonas from Portugal. No Brazilian has tried. We have one or two other things, as you can see, but really very, very little. It's almost totally virgin territory. Why so few translations? I think I gave the answer. There has been no Miltonist, no agent, or as Bourdieu says, gatekeeper, or possibly other possible reasons. Not many translations from English until the 1960s. The era of poetry, a lot since then. Probably many more American translations of American contemporary poetry than non-American poetry. Also, religious works a bit out of fashion. And the fact Milton was a Catholic apologist, Protestant apologist as well, rather anti-Catholic in a mainly Catholic country. Possibly another reason. Okay, let's have a look. I'm going to have I won't be able to do very, very much. I'm just going to look at the first stanza. Okay, what are you going to do when you translate the Raven? Once upon a in a dreary one, upon the weekend, weary of a many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. While I nodded, neatly napping, suddenly there came a tapping of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. 'Tis some visitor, I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, only this and nothing more. What are you going to do with this when you translate it? Well, nothing much is happening. There's this raven who comes, and so you know, in terms of semantics, there's not really very much, but enormous amount is happening in terms of sound here. End rhymes, assonance, mid-rhyme, a lot of internal rhymes. Dreary, weary, nodded, napping, tapping, rapping. Enormous amount is happening inside the poem. So, what will our translator try to do? We obviously think, will the translator try to maintain the very long lines of 15 or 16 syllables, using mainly iambic meter, but also some anapaests? This will be an enormous job for any translator. Have you translated already?
No, they've written some kind of a mock raven,
Oh,
using more or less the same techniques that
okay, I'll come on to this in a minute. We'll come on to this in a minute. Let's look at Baudelaire. Une fois, sur le menu, pendant que l'humanité est fatiguée, ce m'empressait de courir volume de notre oublié, pendant que je donnais de la terre presque à son pied, soudain il se fait une tape. Comme de quelqu'un frappe une douceur, frappe à la porte, c'est quelque visiteur non précieux que frappe à la porte, c'est excellent. What does he do? Baudelaire, the great French romantic poet, what does he do? Doesn't make any effort to maintain the rhymes. We have a bit of the rhythm. Why? Well, Baudelaire was an enormous disciple, fan of Poe. Apparently he had a statue of Poe which he prayed to every night. And Poe was a kind of idol for him. What can we see here? There's actually two main things. He doesn't want to outdo Poe. This is a respectful translation, almost as if he's saying, I'll give you an idea of what it means, but I want you to go to the original. And also we have Baudelaire's Le Petit Poème in prose, the small short poem in prose. We have certain repetitions here, frappant, certain poetic elements are indeed kept. Okay. Fouillons ma veste que refletia minha noite era sombria. Além do triunfo do tempo em curiosíssimos manuais. Exausto, quase adormecido, vi súbito um ruído, tal qual se houvesse alguém batido à minha porta devagar. E alguém fiquei a memorar que bate à porta devagar. Sim, e só isso nada mais. What do we find here? Yes, we do find some attempt to maintain elements of the original rhymes, some internal elements. Doesn't get there all the time, but it's an effort to maintain many elements of the original. This translator, don't have a picture of him, Milton Amado, who also translated, I think he translated, was a translated part of the Bishop's makes a very good effort to maintain elements of the original. Numa meia-noite agreste, quando o dia lento e triste, vários curiosos tomos de ciências ancestrais. Já quase adormecido, viu que parecia o som de alguém que batia levemente nos umbrais. Uma visita me disse, batendo nos umbrais. Só isso, nada mais. This one seems to get very close to the original, maintaining the rhymes, the internal rhymes, the rhythm of the original. This is probably the most famous translation of the Raven into Portuguese by Haroldo. Just translated the first stanza. That's all he did, yeah. Now this, and when I, of course, when I don't have time to look at it, but when I give courses or classes on, a really successful translation, this is an example of this is what I use. He doesn't, however, I don't think no, don't get to it. He doesn't translate the name of the woman, Lenore. He doesn't put any name in. Is the name important, Lenore? It's important to get rhymes with it. But the Pessoa omits that completely. Certo dia, a hora, da meia-noite que acabou, e o caindo de sono e exausto de fadiga, o Pedro muito lá da antiga, de uma velha doutrina, quando morto, ia pensando quando me aporta. Do meu quarto, me soando devagarinho, e disse estas palavras tais: é alguém que me bate a porta de mansinho. Disse isso. E nada mais. What does this translator do? Slows everything down, uses completely different kinds of stanzas, separates the lines, doesn't seem to be so interested in these ba-ba-ba-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. It's a much more considered poem. It's completely different. Yeah. Any ideas? You certainly know the translator. There's been quite a lot of people writing about this. Machado said he wanted to do something different. He was more interested in doing a Brazilian version. He wasn't considered, I don't think, I'm not a Machado expert, but I don't think he was ever considered a great poet. Certainly he doesn't try to reflect the original. Right, what do we have here? A meia-noite uma vez, que velhos livros li, cuidei, que talvez não li. Bate a porta, talvez, era uma leve batida, como que a mente contida. Então pensei a horas tais, há de ser uma visita. Mais tarde a visita deve ser. Nada mais. Totally different again. What is this like? Maybe it could be sung, but what he's trying to do here is trying to Brazilianize it, using redondilhas maiores, these 7-syllable lines. Again, very much a Brazilian version. Now, what do we find here? So many people have translated Poe, so many people translated The Raven. If you go to this site, Elton Freud's Unmoving the Corpus. It's easy to get on the internet. You'll find more than 30 translations of The Raven into Portuguese. Some are parodies, some are, it's almost like a rite of passage. That any translator who's going to make his or her name translating poetry has to do The Raven. And now, of course, you can just put yours on the internet, no problem whatsoever. José Lira, relatively well-known literary translator, especially of Emily Dickinson. And what do we have here? This is our last one, I think. Desta larga existência, certo, ao longo do dia. A ordem é algo moral, algo profana. E o diverso doutrina, as caixas rígidas, curva o peso do sono e da fadiga insana. Mal do pensamento, a dele, I want to go quicker, but can't. O pensamento dele é só seguir. Por essa hora de horror, em que a treva emana, toda infunda hediondez, desolada e fria, da atra a recordação, a atra saudade humana. Foi assim que senti do meu triste aposento, como um leve sussurro a passar lento e lento, e uma leve pancada a bater nos umbrais. Disse comigo, alguém que pela noite fora, bem retada a vista, retada-se agora, a bater mansamente a porta, mas atra, what's atra? What's atra mean? What's that atra? It must be something sinister or something.
Yes.
Yeah. What's happened here? We have sonnets. What is the author, what is the translator doing? Translating Poe into sonnet. Translator is Emilio de Menezes, a Parnassian poet. Also apparently wrote a lot of satirical and comic verse. When I was reading about him last night, I said comic verse looks more interesting than this very slow translation of Raven. Well, what do we find here then? We find so many different translations, and if you're going to do a translation of the Raven, I think as Mary was mentioning, do your own thing. Make it different. Parody it, and if you go onto the site, you find a lot of parodies, comic versions, etc. One interesting one by Paolo Leminski. Very, very different. If you're introducing a poet into Portuguese, your task is going to be very, very different to doing yet another translation of the Raven, the Shakespearean sonnet, of the Baudelaire poem. Okay, maybe I hope I've opened up some things which Mario can come in. I know now that Mario did not do his translation of Milton to fight another poet.
Or maybe I did.
Maybe what Laura said was completely invented. Okay, you can use some.
Oh, no.
It's okay.
But we don't need to go.
Yes, you can.
Thank you, John, for this. I have not translated the Raven, but as I said before, I wrote a mock Raven at some point. That was years ago. Many people were very derisive of it, because as it happens now, Poe seems to be some kind of a sacred figure for a lot of poets. Surprisingly, because his poetry, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but his poetry is not really very good, or is it? But it depends. It's very memorable, which doesn't necessarily make it good. But I think that his fame is due basically to the French, and he seems to be very famous because of that, because of the French. I don't know what would have happened with Poe had not the French do the things they did with his poetry, had they not translated him into French, which is a very interesting translation phenomenon, isn't it? The way that some poets or authors become famous not because of what they wrote in their original languages, but because of what some other poets or translators did with their lines or their poems or whatever. Well, that's very interesting. I hope that happens with John Milton sonnets at some point. Maybe not through me, but perhaps through some future translators. Do you know whether there are any contemporary translations of Milton's sonnets into Portuguese?
Do you think there are any?
No, there are none. That That's very interesting because you said there were no Portuguese, Portuguese or Brazilian Miltonists.
Yeah, Portugal, I don't know, you see, maybe everything is very divine. We don't have so much contact with Portugal.
Well, that surprises me because
it's easy for me to ask.
Mm-hmm.
I can ask, do you know Hui Oni? I can ask Hui. If there's anybody we would certainly know. There's this Daniel Jonas. Presumably, if he translated Paradise Lost, he must be Muslim. But there's relatively little academic contact between Brazil and Portugal.
See.
Yeah, people have their own contact, but not. Portugal never opened universities in Brazil. Quite the opposite. Didn't even allow printing presses.
Exactly.
That's interesting because going back to the Milton thing, at international Milton symposiums, there's always 2 or 3 Brazilians there.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm always the only Mexican. Well, not always because I don't go to every single.
I gave some names here of this translation of Paradise Regained. Guilherme Gontijo from I know a little bit. I'll send out some mails afterwards.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, that'd be interesting to know. But anyway, I think I should speak of the reasons that I translated these sonnets. One of the reasons it has to do with the convenience of translating something like that. And that's something I don't think we talk about enough when we talk about different processes of translation. The convenience that this or that work of literature signifies for this or that translator. There are some works of literature, talking about literary translation, there are some works of literature that are very inconvenient to translate, either because they're too long, or because they're too renowned, or because they have been translated before on more than one occasion, or simply because the rights are not available. So these poems were very convenient. The first because they were written over 400 years ago, so there's no rights to worry about. There's no copyrights to worry about. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, because they had never been translated in verse into Spanish before. They had been translated twice, but not in verse. They had been translated in prose. Also, and I should mention this as well, that these are very convenient to translate because they're very few. There are just 24 of them, right? As opposed to the more than 150 sonnets that Shakespeare has given us. In any case, it took a few years. This work, Milton sonnets, it took a few years to translate. A few years of thinking and rethinking, overthinking what to do with them. And I think John hit the nail on the head when he started talking about what to do with certain poems with regard to their form. Because I do believe that a shapeless sonnet is no sonnet. I don't know if you agree with that. So there was no point in translating these sonnets into prose once again. The other thing is that Milton sonnets are not very famous. Well, they ceased to be famous at some point because they were very important, at least in the Anglophone world, in the Anglosphere, as some people call it, for at least 2 centuries, over the course of the over the course of the 18th and the 19th centuries. They were very famous, they were very influential. Almost every poet in the late 18th century and the whole of the 19th century thought of Milton whenever they wrote poetry, not only sonnets, but poetry. Think of, for example, Wordsworth, who wrote over 500 sonnets. Where I think he wrote over 800 sonnets or something like that. So, I mean, the man had nothing else to do with that. But he always thought of Milton when he wrote not only sonnets but also the rest of his poetry, his most famous poems, for example. Think of Keats, who also thought about Shakespeare, he thought about Milton when he wrote his poetry, or Shelley himself, etc., etc. So I cannot begin to tell how influential these particular poems were on several generations of poets, English. But outside the English-speaking world, the sonnets are not very well known. I mean, Milton's sonnets. But curiously enough, these sonnets have been, for example, talking about the Italian language, right, a sister language of our languages, both Portuguese and Spanish. Thinking of Italian, these sonnets had been translated in verse twice into Italian, which is curious, at least. It is a curious phenomenon. They have been translated into German as well, in verse. And as far as I know, they have also been translated in verse into Arabic, which is something we need to think about. The reason that certain kinds of works get translated into some languages and not into some other languages. Are those linguistic reasons? Are those political reasons? Are those religious reasons? I see no reason why these sonnets should be translated into Arabic, for example, or into Italian. We're talking about a language that is closely related to, for example, the Muslim religion in the case of Arabic, or Italian, which is basically, I'll dare to say this, which is basically a Catholic language, right? Or language that has been profoundly influenced by Catholic thought. And Milton was, as John said, Milton was a staunch Protestant, very anti-Catholic. But incidentally, he was very much an admirer of both the Italian language and Italian literature or art in general. So much so that he went actually to, he went on tour to Italy, as many English poets did at the time. But he was particularly fond of Italy. Versions of Milton's sonnets into Portuguese.
Do you think there are any?
No, there are none. That's very interesting because you said there were no Portuguese, Portuguese or Brazilian Miltonists.
Yeah, Portugal, I don't know, you see, everything is very divided. We don't have so much contact with Portugal.
Well, that surprises me because
it's easy for me to ask.
Mm-hmm.
I can ask, do you know Hui Oli? I can ask Hui. If there's anybody with Hui would certainly know. There's this Daniel Jonas. Presumably, if he translated Paradise Lost, he must be Muslim. But there's relatively little academic contact between Brazil and Portugal.
See.
Yeah, people have their own contact, but they're not. Portugal never opened universities in Brazil. Quite the opposite. Didn't even allow printing presses.
Exactly.
That's interesting because going back to the Milton thing, at international Milton symposiums, there's always 2 or 3 Brazilians there.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm always the only Mexican. Well, not always because I don't go to every single.
I gave some names here of this translation of Paradise Regained.
Yeah.
Guilherme como teacher for
Mhm.
once. I know it would be
Yeah.
I'll send out some mails afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. Yeah, that'd be interesting to know. But anyway, I think I should speak of the reasons that I translated these sonnets. One of the reasons has to do with the convenience of translating something like that. And that's something I don't think we talk about enough when we talk about different processes of translation. The convenience that this or that work of literature signifies for this or that translator. There are some works of literature, talking about literary translation, there are some works of literature that are very inconvenient to translate, either because they're too long, or because they're too renowned, or because they have been translated before on more than one occasion, or simply because the rights are not available. So these poems were very convenient. The first because they were written over 400 years ago. So there's no rights to worry about. There's no copyrights to worry about. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, because they had never been translated in verse into Spanish before. They had been translated twice, but not in verse. They had been translated in prose. Also, and I should mention this as well, but these are very convenient to translate because they're very few. There are just 24 of them, right? As opposed to the more than 150 sonnets that Shakespeare has given us. In any case, it took a few years. This work, I mean Milton sonnets, it took a few years to translate. A few years of thinking and rethinking and overthinking what to do with them. And I think John hit the nail on the head when he started talking about what to do with certain poems with regard to their form. Because I do believe that a shapeless sonnet is no sonnet. I don't know if you agree with that. So there was no point in translating these sonnets into prose once again. The other thing is that Milton sonnets are not very famous. Well, they ceased to be famous at some point because they were very important, at least in the Anglophone world, in the Anglosphere, some people call it, for at least 2 centuries. Over the course of the 17th, over the course of the 18th and the 19th centuries, they were very famous, they were very influential. Almost every poet in the late 18th century and the whole of the 19th century thought of Milton whenever they wrote poetry, not only sonnets, but poetry in general. Think of, for example, Wordsworth, who wrote over 500 sonnets. Right. I think he wrote over 800 sonnets or something like that. So, I mean, the man had nothing else to do with that. But he always thought of Milton when he wrote not only sonnets but also the rest of his poetry, his most famous poems, for example. Think of Keats, who also thought about Shakespeare. He also thought about Milton when he wrote his poetry, or Shelley himself, etc., etc. So I cannot begin to tell how influential these particular poems were on several generations of poets, English. But outside the English-speaking world, the sonnets are not very well known. I mean, Milton's sonnets. But curiously enough, these sonnets have been, for example, talking about the Italian language, right? A sister language of our languages, both Portuguese and Spanish. Thinking of Italian, these sonnets had been translated in verse twice into Italian, which is curious at least, which is a curious phenomenon. They have been translated into German as well, in verse. And as far as I know, they have also been translated in verse into Arabic, which is something we need to think about. The reason that certain kinds of works get translated into some languages and not into some other languages. Are those linguistic reasons? Are those political reasons? Are those religious reasons? I see no reason why these sonnets should be translated into Arabic, for example, or into Italian. We're talking about a language that is closely related to, for example, the Muslim religion in the case of Arabic, or Italian, which is basically, I'll dare to say this, which is basically a Catholic language, right? Or language that has been profoundly influenced by Catholic thought. And Milton was, as John said, Milton was a staunch Protestant, very anti-Catholic. But incidentally, he was very much an admirer of both the Italian language and Italian literature or art in general. So much so that he went to Italy he went on tour to Italy, as many English poets did at the time. But he was particularly fond of Italy and of the Italian language, and poets like Tasso or Dante, of course, Petrarch, etc. So I think we ought to think about the reasons that some poets are or are not translated into this or that language, and we ought to think about how pertinent it is to translate certain poets or certain works of poetry into this or that language. For example, what is the point of translating Milton's sonnets into Spanish or into Portuguese, if you will? One of my reasons to translate those is that they have never been translated this way into Spanish. The other reason is that I think these terms should be more widely known, right? Because of what they
So turning into English, then
Yes.
we can try to continue. We leave there. We can continue with the reading of at least one example, and then some questions about what you presented.
The famous ones.
As you wish. Perhaps we can ask for a number between 1 and 24.
So is the one you're particularly proud of? Translation you really like?
A translation I really like, let's see, 18, for example. Number 18.
Okay, how are we going to do this? Read everything line by line? Or
No, you go on in English, you read the English, and then I'll read.
On the late massacre in Piedmont, avenge, O Lord, thy slaughtered saints, whose bones lie scattered on the Alpine mountains cold. Even them who kept thy truth so pure of all, when all our fathers worship stocks and stones. Forget not, in thy book record their groans, who were thy sheep, and in their ancient fall, slain by the bloody Piedmontese that roll, mother with infant down the rocks. Their moans the vales redoubled to the hills, and they to heaven. Their martyred blood and ashes sow o'er all the Italian fields where it still doth sway the triple towns, that from these may grow 100-fold, who having learnt thy way, early may fly the Babylonian wood.
This is a very unusual sonnet because it's about, well, precisely that, a massacre. In this case, late means recent. So the massacre had just taken place a few months before Milton wrote this. And in Spanish it reads, de la reciente masacre en Piamonte. Venga, oh Señor, a tus santos inmolados, cuyos huesos yacen en los Alpes fríos, quienes tu verdad guardaban ya de antiguo cuando nuestros padres adoraban palos. Nunca olvides que en tu libro esté asentado de tu añeja grey y tu rebaño el grito que lanzaran despeñados madre e hijo por los crueles piamonteses masacrados. Desde el valle se elevó su voz al monte y a los cielos. Hoy su sangre y sus cenizas abonan campos italianos, regidos por el tirano triple. Que de ellos broten cientos, que habiendo aprendido ya tus vías, de Babilonia abandonen los juicios. The triple tyrant is none other than the Pope.
Right. What is the difficulties that you faced when you were translating the sonnets? Because sonnets are difficult to write, and I guess that to translate much more difficult.
Yes, of course. Milton's, I don't know if John agrees with me on this, but Milton's sonnets are very, very compact. They're very dense in terms of meaning and allusion. So I think the main problem for me was to try to keep those meanings and allusions alive in Spanish. I don't know if I succeeded doing that in this case, but I swear to you, I tried my best. So you can imagine what it must have meant to translate something like, for example, line 4, right? When all our fathers worshipped stocks and stones. Talking about rhythm and alliteration, when all our fathers worshipped stocks and stones. He's talking about the English people, right? Who were very much, uncivilized at the time that these group of people were already thinking of one single pseudo-Protestant religion that was common to them all. I had to bring it down to cuando nuestros padres adoraban palos, which I'm sure sounds very like Portuguese, right? They worshipped sticks, right? But of course, Milton has their stocks and stones for the alliteration, and I'm sure he's thinking about the famous adage, right? Sticks and stones can break your bones, etc.
Yeah, I noticed the first one, yon blue is grey, all the woods in the front, done with fresh hope, esperanza.
It's not one.
Yeah. So, there's no way.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible in a language that needs more words to put everything there without really extending the length.
Yeah, exactly. Because in Spanish, sonnets require 11 syllable lines. But one of the problems of Spanish is that the words are very long in Spanish, as compared to the monosyllables or bisyllables that Milton uses. Right? So it's really very difficult. If we go back to that time, for example, think about words like think about a line like, have linked that amorous power to thy soft lay. Right? Have linked that amorous power to thy soft lay. Almost every word except for amorous and, linked are monosyllables. Right? But then in Spanish we've got tus trinos dotar de brío amoroso. Amoroso. Right? That's 3 syllables. So what's more important then, right?
Interesting to hear from anybody being attracted or completely put off the idea of translating poetry. Interesting to hear from everybody else. Do we have any future translators of poetry here? No, I can't see anybody who is.
Don't be dissuaded, be encouraged.
Tone is difficult
Yeah.
because of the sounds of the words in English brings us a kind of atmosphere
Yeah.
that when you have to translate it into another language that has more open vowels, like the Spanish one,
Of course.
or the Portuguese more closed, but different variations of the same sound. So I think it is difficult to catch the tone together and the
Yeah.
atmosphere of the poem, isn't it?
Yeah, Borges used to say, well, the famous Argentine poet Borges used to say that modern English has no real vowels. They're all semi-vowels, and I think he's got kind of a point there. Whereas in Spanish, all vowels are real vowels. Right? A, E, I, O, U, right? Think of words once again like amoroso, and in English, amorous. Amorous. Yeah. See, it's
very interesting.
Yeah.
And John, you have one of the publications referring to enculturation and acculturation in translation. How would you say so in this, speaking about the sonnets, Milton sonnets or Milton's work?
Okay, acculturation. This was on translation of Georges Edian-Chiette to P, an article I did with a student of mine, where most of the article was how do you translate religious terms into 2P, the general indigenous language spoken in large parts of Brazil, time of conquest. And so it was the Tupani, the Indian deity of thunder, became God. The idea of certain elements of stronger Christian religion, emphasis on virginity, the angels, were very little. So kind of equivalence had to be found. The alternative was to put these terms directly from English into, directly from Portuguese into Tupi, and hope that the indigenous converts would get some idea of what they meant. How do we think of this with Milton? The religious terms that basically I think of the strong Protestant elements in some of them. The anti-popery, what do we do? What was done? I'm sure this put off potential translators. In the country, now maybe not so much, but where is this person? Where is this person who's going to take charge of a project to translate Milton? In the undergraduate course, I think it's just mentioned. You never studied any Milton? No?
His blandness is there. I remember using this in my poetry classes. And then
but you have so many people jostling for position to be taught. So you have to find. It'd be interesting. I'll make contact with Guilherme from Teachers in Panama. You're going back to Mexico soon?
Well, in about 10 days.
Oh yeah. Where are you going in Brazil?
We're going to Ouro Preto and then.
Yes.
And then
I see. Oh, you're going. Okay, you're not going to Curitiba.
No.
No, not Kukuriti.
No. Okay. Well, anyway, I'll make the contact this evening, and at least you can contact my email or something. This Guilherme from Teachers Flores in Paraná is a well-known translator. I didn't realize he'd done anything with Milton. And I think the other possibly he's been at the Congress mentioned, or maybe some of his students. And sometimes you have people doing things in other universities and then you find out when you go to a conference or find out just by chance.
And just to add to what you were saying about religion, is everybody acquainted with the Inquisition's index? Index Librorum Prohibitorum, right? Which was a list of bad books, right? Milton was always in it. So Milton was one of the Inquisition's, the Catholic Church's banned authors, right? And he remained in that index until it ceased to be published, which was in 1924, if I'm not mistaken. So you can imagine.
Yeah.
Shakespeare was never in it, but Milton was. So, yes.
It's interesting, I'm going to be in Britain for a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
and I'll be there on Bonfire Night, Guy Fawkes, which is very anti-Catholic.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why it's become less popular, if you don't know, none of you have been in England, not Britain, I should say, parts of England on the 5th of November.
Remember.
Yeah. It commemorates the fact that Guy Fawkes was discovered when he was just about to blow up the Houses of Parliament. Guy Fawkes was a Catholic, nowadays we would say, maniac terrorist. And every year, or when I was a kid, it was a big occasion. The kids have a bit like my guessing Judas. And you have the little doll, you ask for money in the street to buy fireworks, and then on the 5th of November you throw the doll representing Guy Fawkes onto the bonfire. There's a town very near Brighton, in the town of Lewis, there's a festival which is like carnival style festival, and one or two other places as well. But you know, nowadays it's become Halloween has become more. I never celebrated Halloween when I was a kid. It was nothing. Whereas now it's become as or more popular than Guy Fawkes. Then you always have the kids having accidents with fireworks. Not many people. I think with Halloween, the witches, convents have been protested. So things change. I've been out to Britain. I'd be interested. Am I going to celebrate? I'm sure Milton, I don't know when they began celebrating Guy Fawkes. I'm sure Milton would have been. Milton would have been there.
Brilliant Guy Fawkes is refugees. If you're familiar with the V for Vendetta, you might have heard that story.
That's great. So in order to finish, another one more point? One more point?
So perhaps number one?
Two?
All right, let's do number one.
Okay.
Which is a very, very typical sonnet. That one is very typical. Nightingale.
Oh, nightingale, that on yon bloomy spray warblest at eve, when all the woods are still. Thou with fresh hope the lover's heart dost fill, while the jolly hours lead on propitious May. Thy liquid notes that close the eye of day, first heard before the shallow cuckoo's bill, portends success on earth. Or if Jove's will have linked that amorous power to thy soft lay, now timeless sleep, ere the rude bird of hate foretell my hopeless doom in some grove nigh. As thou from year to year hast sung too late for my relief, yet hadst no reason why, whether the muse or love call thee his meet, both them I serve, and of their train am I.
Oh tú, ruiseñor, que cantas, oh tú, ruiseñor, que en ramas floridas de noche, en la fronda, trinas en calma, al cor del amante das esperanza, cuando horas felices traen la abundancia. Tu voz apacigua al ojo celeste, fluida anticipa el cuco inclemente y agüera el amor. Si Jove ordenó sus trinos dotar de brillo amoroso, hoy cántame ya, y que odioso el cuclillo mi pena no anuncie en un bosque cercano. Moroso tu canto ha sido de antaño, sin causa o razón, favor me ha negado, y aunque de amor o musa sea aliado, a entrambos sirvo y en sus filas leal. I had to resort to a couple of, unfamiliar words in Spanish, to certain archaisms, which, now that I'm thinking of it, might be more familiar to you in Portuguese. For example, cor, rather than corazón, or entrambos, both, right, both. So, there you go.
And thank you very much for both of you.
Thank you.
And